Welcome to Rise Up. I'm Nikema Levy-Armstrong, civil rights attorney, activist, and the executive director of the Wayfinder Foundation. As you all know, our nation was rocked this past Wednesday when a group of white supremacists stormed the U.S. Capitol. For many people, it was an incredible surprise to see the boldness in which these people acted by the thousands in breaking windows, being armed in the Capitol, and just all of the terrorism that ensued as a result of their actions. Today, my special guest is Catrice Jackson. Catrice is a master anti-racism trainer. She is an activist. She is a best-selling author, an all-around incredible Black woman who speaks the truth boldly and unapologetically. She is joining us here today as we dissect the terrorism and white supremacy that happened at the U.S. Capitol, and we're going to unpack some of the racial implications. Welcome, Catrice.
Hey, Nikema. I'm glad to be here with you today.
So, Catrice, tell us what your initial reaction was when you saw these white terrorists essentially, I don't even know if I can say breaking into the Capitol, because it looked to me like the red carpet was rolled out to them to go in and do what they did. So what was your reaction to the situation?
You know, it's funny that you say that there was a red carpet rolled out. There's actually a cartoon meme floating around on Instagram that literally shows a National Guard person and a police officer rolling out a red carpet to someone who looks like one of the MAGA folks with a hood on, with a KKK hood on. And so I would absolutely agree. And that it definitely appeared by many of the videos that I watched that they were essentially let in. And I truly believe that it was an inside job. Based on some of the videos that I watched and many of them I posted on Facebook, there's nothing that can make me believe that it wasn't an inside job. We had, one of the officers essentially opening up the gate, the bike rack, and, just letting people in and motioning to let them in. In the incident and the video where the woman actually got shot, you see, number one, police coming up the stairs. By the time they get to the top of the stairs, they see the mob. They essentially do nothing until the woman gets shot. And then it's like, oh, shoot, all of a sudden, they think that they need to do something. And I believe that there was actually a lawmaker maybe on the stairwell as well during that video clip. But Nikema, absolutely, without a doubt, I believe that it was an inside job. And, to say I was surprised by it, not so much. We all knew, I think there was enough information floating around on the internet that told us that these people were planning to be there. But, the police and the government don't see white folks as a threat. So they just thought they were going to have this rowdy group of predominantly white folks outside the Capitol and that they didn't need to do anything.
Mm-hmm. Now, how would you describe what happened on Wednesday, right? Because, of course, initially, the way that many of us described it, say, wait, these are pro-Trump protesters out here at the Capitol doing what they're doing. But then as things begin to unfold, it's like, wait a minute, this looks like an insurrection. It looks like a coup. This looks like a Klan meeting. I mean, how would you, it definitely is not protesters in terms of the way that I typically think about protesters. How would you define what happened? What language are you using to unpack what went down?
Well, in a lot of ways, it's typical white violence. It's white male energy. It is, as Malcolm said, chickens coming home to roost. It is white violence. It is thuggery. It's criminal. And I heard, through some of the things that I've watched on the news, CNN in particular, that they actually went inside the Capitol and pissed, like peed in the
What?
hallways. Yes, peed
Like
in the
some animals.
hallways, like some animals,
That's
marking
absolutely
their
disgusting.
territory.
Well, they think that it's their territory, right? Because weren't they saying we want to take our country back and thinking that this was about their freedom?
Absolutely. And here's the thing. They didn't feel like they were out of line to do what they did. And because they were allowed to do what they did, it sends this, subliminal message, but, subliminal, but also very explicit message that this is our house. This is white people's house. And we can come into our house anytime we want and do whatever the hell we want. And nobody's going to say anything. And essentially by, folks allowing them to come on in, just, it's like, a neighbor knocking on the door or a family member knocking on the door, knock, knock, knock. Oh yeah, come on in. They really felt like it was their house, their right, their property, and that they were entitled to go in there and act like animals.
Mm-hmm. Now, I agree. That's exactly how they acted. And our producer sent a note saying that they were literally spreading poop everywhere, which to me is barbaric and animalistic, to say the least.
Well, you know what it is? It's sociopathic.
Mm-hmm.
That's what sociopaths and psychopaths do. That's not normal human behavior.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think that they were allowed to go as far as they did? Because I think about protests that we hold, and literally, not only is the welcome mat not rolled out, but we're often having to face down officers in riot gear, armed to the T, high-powered military assault rifles, tear gas. When we were kettled on I-94 the day after the election, 646 of us, they actually had a huge sound machine that they were going to use on us, right? Which could have blasted our eardrums.
Mm-hmm.
So we are met with a great deal of violence and excessive force when we're out there protesting. I couldn't imagine if we were, as Black people, trying to even get inside the gate of the Capitol, let alone being allowed to just roam freely, storming the Capitol, putting my feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk. I can't imagine being allowed to do that and still being able to breathe after that was over.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that I think about, and I think we'll talk about it later, but we wouldn't have been able to even get inside. As we saw with, some of the protests going on around the Capitol, I think it was back in June or July, they had already pre-planned for the National Guard and the police to be highly present during that time. And so, I don't know how long that event was planned or what the planning looked like, or if intelligence, if you will, was able to pick up on, what the plan was, but they were very well planned and situated around the Capitol when the Black Lives Matter folks were out there, legitimately protesting, the murdering of Black bodies. But all of a sudden, they just think, oh, we don't need any kind of security or police presence with these MAGA folks, coming to the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it, again, goes back to when they see us, they don't see humanity. Mm-hmm. They don't see human beings. They don't see people that are important, that have lives that matter. And so I was watching some of the video where the police were literally being beat up, like attacked by these folks. They didn't pull out a gun. They didn't pull out batons. They literally were just, kind of pushing them and blocking them because they didn't want to hurt them. Mm-hmm. And they didn't want to hurt them because they could see their humanity. And when we show up, they don't see us as human beings. They see us as property and objects.
Absolutely. And to your point, I remember one jarring photo. I wound up seeing it on CNN and then posting it on Facebook, where there are security guards inside the House floor, and they have guns pointed at the door. And when you scroll in and look more closely at the picture, you see these white faces peeking in through the holes in the door. And I'm thinking, why are they just holding these people at gunpoint and not actually escalating like they normally would, right? Because how many Black lives have been lost for just doing basic things that human beings do, driving in a car, being on your cell phone, just
playing loud music.
Playing loud music, right? Basic things that we are killed for by law enforcement. And these people were able to take things to the extreme and allowed to get away with it. I kept wondering, well, where is the tear gas? Because they have very, very strong tear gas like they used on us this summer in the Twin Cities during the protests in the aftermath of George Floyd being killed. I had been tear gassed in Ferguson in 2014, and I thought that was strong. But the tear gas they used on us in Minneapolis over the summer was significantly stronger, to the point where I literally couldn't breathe and I was gagging like I was going to throw up because of how strong that tear gas was. And my voice is still not the same as it was before that protest, right? So they have very strong chemical weapons. I mean, they're the government, the US government, for goodness sakes. They had all kinds of lethal and non-lethal weapons at their disposal that they could have used if they were trying to disperse the crowd. And we know that if those folks had been Black, they certainly would have used them. So I was wondering, well, where's the tear gas? Where's all this stuff that you practice on when it comes to Black Lives Matter protesters?
Right. Well, one of the things that I find interesting and I believe to be true is this this idea or this truth that when they think about us, like I said before, they don't think of us as human beings. And so I think, let me see the best way I can say this. So on the outside, there's this appearance that this thing, this rally, this mob was about, taking back our government, standing up for our rights, the republic, the revolution, whatever. But if you look at that and you look at some of the other things that have happened around the country on the same day that this, group of savages seized the Capitol, you'll see that there has been explicit harm to Black people. You will see the noose and the hanging platform in the background. You'll see the Confederate flag. You'll see all of these signs that really tell you what this thing was all about. They want us to believe that this was, their frustration with the government. But all the other evidence, all the other things that we saw happening around the country on this same day point to one thing, and it points to anti-Blackness. It points to this group of people and their mindset, their philosophies and their theories and their ways of living and the way they show up in the world really is an anti-Black sentiment. Because if it wasn't, what's the need for the noose?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you pay attention to that, what they're really angry about is that they don't want to see Black people get rights. They don't want to see us advance. They don't want to see us progress. Essentially, they want us to go back to the plantation and be enslaved. And so I think if we got to look deeper, in under the levels of the surface of this thing and really see it for what it is. It's some retaliatory anti-Black white male predominantly violence.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about the use of the Confederate flag, obviously there's a historical context and backdrop within which this happened. And I don't know if folks know much about my background, but I born in Mississippi, grew up in South Central LA, went off to boarding school on the East Coast. One of the things that was interesting during my time there at boarding school was that we had this huge debate when the movie Malcolm X came out. And we were walking around wearing X caps, and we had some of our classmates who complained to the administration, basically saying that Malcolm X was hateful, he was racist, and all this other stuff to try to ban us from being able to wear X caps. And we fought back and told the truth about who Malcolm X was. But then we also said, why are y'all focusing on our Malcolm X gear when you have Confederate flags hanging in your windows when we're walking from our dorms down to the main building? Because we had some folks who were from Texas and other places where to them, they would say, oh, this is just a symbol of pride. Or, oh, my great-granddaddy fought in the Civil War. So that's what the Confederate flag really symbolizes. And the other thing that in the midst of all this racial tension, one thing our school did was they took the whole school to go watch the autobiography of Malcolm X. They rented out a theater. But it's actually that, some people's understanding opened up, but other people actually became more retaliatory against Black people on campus. And I remember walking into one classroom and they wrote on the board, "The South shall rise again." And then America, love it or leave it. So that is that anti-Black sentimentality that these symbols represent. And they are part of the deep, dark history of slavery in this country and the continual battering and maiming and dismemberment of Black bodies. Can you talk a little bit about that historical context? Because you mentioned anti-Blackness. A lot of times people don't know what anti-Blackness is, even though they may be manifesting it, because we focus a lot on, diversity and racism. But now, I've been calling a spade, white supremacy and anti-Blackness. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Well, first, let me say, I don't call it white supremacy anymore. I call it just what the hell it is, white terrorism. There is nothing supreme about the things that the collective white body has done to Black bodies in this country. There's nothing supreme about rape and murder and pedophilia. There's nothing supreme about breeding farms, buck breaking, stripping families from each other, raping women, creating children and denying them and enslaving their own children. There's nothing supreme about the collective white body in the way that they have shown up in this country century after century from day one, at least since 1619 in this country, and prior to, in the way that they showed up with the indigenous native people of this country. There is nothing supreme about white supremacy. And we can trace that way back to the days of the Inquisition. We can trace that violence way back to the days of Rome, in the Colosseum. White people have always been violent. And as far as I'm concerned, it's in their DNA. It's who they are. And over the years and over the centuries, they may not be able to be physically violent and explicitly violent in the ways that they could, not only even 50 years ago. If you really think about it, Nekima, it's only been about 50, 60 years ago that white folks could publicly be violent to Black bodies. That's just a little bit over a generation. And I always say I'm that generation because my mom experienced Jim Crow. And so I'm only one generation away from white folks essentially legally being able to be violent against Black bodies. So I call that thing just what it is, white terrorism. But I wonder, did you see that there was a reenactment of George Floyd on the steps of that Capitol?
No. Tell me more about that. What in the world?
Yes. Two men are actually reenacting George Floyd's lynching, his murder. One man laying face down and the other one with the knee on his neck. And they're laughing. And someone actually caught a photo of that. It's floating around on the internet.
That is sickening.
And so if they're, that's another piece of evidence that says, there it is right there. Thank you for posting that. If this thing that they did at the Capitol really was about their rights or their freedoms or being frustrated with government, why all of the anti-Black sentiment?
Mm-hmm.
Why would they need to do that? And that tells me the truth is that the underbelly of this whole revolution, this civil war, as they call it, is anti-Black sentiment. They want us to shut up, sit down, stop demanding justice and freedom. They want us to go back to making America great again, which to them means get back on the plantation, Negro. That's where you belong.
Mm-hmm.
And so this history is so deeply embedded. This anti-Black history is so deeply embedded. And at the end of the day, what anti-Blackness is a deep-seated, deeply rooted down in your cellular, down in your DNA, hate and resentment and despising of Blackness and everything that Blackness represents.
Mm-hmm. Well, along with this notion of anti-Blackness is the danger, right, that puts us in as Black people, because it's not just rhetoric, right? That's what they showed, excuse me, when they went into the Capitol, that it's not just rhetoric, it's not just them with their, the talk that they talk, and all of their dialogues that's happening on the dark web, how they use social media to perpetuate white supremacy and anti-Blackness. But the fact that they're willing to put their bodies and lives on the line, show up armed to the teeth, even bring bombs. There were at least 2 pipe bombs that were found at the Capitol. They're willing to go all the way, right, to go the distance, which means we're in danger, excuse me, as Black people when white terrorism is allowed to persist. You know this from conversations that we've had, but in the Twin Cities, many of us have had to go get our licenses to carry because of white supremacists showing up armed at our protests. There were stories after George Floyd was killed of white people coming into the Twin Cities, chasing Black kids down the street at gunpoint. They were burning things down. So we had to, some like the NAACP, for example, set up community patrols to have Black men and women from the community and allies guarding the buildings. Like they had to be armed because you call 911, the police were not showing up. So these folks were allowed to literally roam through our community, terrorizing Black people. We didn't have a press conference from the governor saying, this is what we have discovered, our intelligence has discovered. These people are highly sophisticated. So our government knows what they're up to, right? We have the CIA, we have all kinds of intelligence agencies that know what's going on, but are not getting the information out, that are not protecting Black bodies, and that are allowing these groups to form and proliferate. So after I got my license to carry, I went into a gun store, and the majority of people in there were white, and they were getting like AR-15s, like the,
yes.
I'm thinking, wait, I'm just trying to find a little handgun, right, to protect myself. And I'm seeing them with these high-powered weapons that they're able to buy at the gun shop and buying more than one. And I'm thinking we're completely unprepared. Like a lot of us aren't taking the threat of white terrorism as seriously as we should. But these people are willing to go as far as the government allows them to go in terms of abusing Black bodies, just as they did in the days of slavery. They were able to do any and everything to us. And some of the people who participated were presidents of the United States.
Absolutely.
So we look at Trump and we're like, Trump is a demagogue. Trump is racist. Trump is a white supremacist. Trump is anti-Black. But Trump isn't the only one, right? This is the culture that has been cultivated in America that allows something like this to happen. So who do you think is ultimately responsible for what happened at the Capitol?
Oh, wow, that's a loaded question. If I can take a step back, I know when we came back from the rallies and protests there in the Twin Cities, you know, my husband was like, immediately, we are literally getting off the interstate onto the exit that's going to take us to Cabela's. And if you don't know what Cabela's is where you buy guns and ammunition. He was like, nah, we are not going to be, you know, we're not going to be prepared for this. not prepared for this. And so while we were there, I have a short story too. They tried to prevent us from buying weapons. They literally did everything that they could to try to, create a way so that we couldn't walk out the store with something. Nevertheless, we did walk out the store with something, but not after incident. The other thing that we noticed is that you can't, it's hard to find bullets. It's hard to find bullets for certain guns because these folks are stocking up.
Yeah.
They have stocked up. They've been training their children since they were knee high, how to hold a gun, how to shoot a gun. That has been going on in the underbelly of America for since they lost. Literally since they lost. It's this plan to continue to, enslave us and keep us captive, if you will, or kill us, to be quite frank. It's been going on for centuries. And at the end of the day, folks ain't gonna like this. But yes, Trump is essentially what I have said, the boil on America's behind, who finally burst. But he isn't necessarily the infection inside.
Mm-hmm.
That's been there. He just came along and bust that thing open. I have to say that I believe that the collective white body is responsible. That includes the do-gooders. That includes the so-called performative allies. That includes the white folks who don't think they're like those people. That includes white folks in the government, in the police force, in the educational systems, because, we can look at this terroristic, violent thing that happened a few days ago, but we send our kids to school every day to be violently abused by good, so-called good, progressive, white female teachers who are traumatizing our kids every day. We are experiencing trauma in every space, every place, every industry. There's no safe place for Black bodies. And if that is true, and I know that it is, then it's not those MAGA people. It's not just them. It's not just Trump. It's the collective white body all over the nation that's responsible.
Mm-hmm. And the collective white body that, remained silent while Trump was spewing his hatred all along, right? They were comfortable and safe. The collective white body who allowed Trump to get in the office in the first place, some of whom even voted.
53% of white women.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And like you said, these are teachers, police officers, do-gooders, people who don't think that they're like them, and I've seen that on some of my posts where people are like, it's the Republican Party who is, responsible, who's this? And I'm like, it's Democrats and Republicans.
That's right.
Who are responsible for what is happening in this situation. Even the fact that we have a two-party system and our choices are so limited, it's almost like we're choosing between one white supremacist over another.
That's right.
Because of some of the policies that they have perpetuated, or how they've had to walk over Black bodies even to get to the White House, right? I know that you know what happened here with one of the candidates, Amy Klobuchar, who ran after being a prosecutor here, who was involved in wrongfully imprisoning Mayan Burrell, a 16-year-old Black boy. And ultimately, he had been sentenced to life in prison for a crime he didn't commit. So we literally had to disrupt her campaign events for her to listen to us, because we said, you're not going to keep stepping over Black bodies and using this false story to get to the highest office in the land. Meanwhile, disregarding us unless we're willing to campaign for her and vote for her. But that's been the history of what's happened in this nation with a number of presidents who were slave owners. And I think about the case of Dred Scott, who sued for his freedom, born into slavery, moved to Minnesota and lived as a free man. And then when he got ready to sue for his right to be free, the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, a man named Roger B. Taney, who came from a slaveholding family, said in that opinion that slaves are not able to sue, they cannot be free, and that the Black man has no rights, which the white man is bound to respect. That is in Supreme Court jurisprudence. The people who are supposed to be protecting our rights under the Constitution, that's a part of their legacy that often gets whitewashed.
Yep.
And these are institutions, again, that the collective white body holds in high esteem and high regard, without telling the other part of the story in terms of how these institutions and these decisions have been used to dehumanize us.
Absolutely. You know what? I keep seeing on TV and on social media where white folks have been saying, commentators, anchors, whoever these folks are on TV, white folks have been saying, this is one of the darkest days in America. Really? This is one of the darkest days in America? It blows my mind, but then again, it doesn't. No, the darkest days in America were the 300 plus years that white folks enslaved Black bodies. That's one of the darkest moments in our history and time. They are really traumatized. White folks are really traumatized and upset and personally affected that the same system that they participate in to oppress and marginalize Black bodies turned on them. Chickens coming home to roost, them being willing to hurt and harm their own for the simple fact that their disdain and hate for Blackness is so strong that they are willing to hurt their own. They are willing to allow a white woman to get shot, point blank, period. And that essentially is okay.
Mm-hmm.
They're willing to harm themselves. They're really willing to cut off their own leg because they hate Black bodies so much.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that pattern in history as well.
Mm-hmm.
White folks were willing to hurt other white folks, kill other white folks by any means necessary to keep Black people in captivity for 300 years. They didn't care if they were killing their own people. That's sociopathic too.
Mm-hmm.
That's psychopathic behavior too.
Mm-hmm.
And this psychopathic, sociopathic behavior isn't anything new. This is just the 2021 version of white people rage and white people violence. And so this is what they do. This isn't an oddity. This isn't an outlier.
Mm-hmm.
This is white folks' behavior. And it has been for centuries, even beyond 1619.
Mm-hmm. So how do you react when white people feign surprise at how bad things are with regard to this level of terrorism that we all witness? I mean, I've seen some, and I'm thinking they've stormed capitals before, right? They stormed the Capitol in Michigan. They've been walking around armed and maskless, and that's what
they actually had a plan to kidnap that woman and kill her in Michigan.
Wow.
That was part of the plan. I think they were going to kidnap her and kill her.
Mm-hmm.
She was on CNN last night talking about it and basically said that there was enough intelligence out there that people should have known that this was happening. They blatantly said it. They had a plan. They had a strategy. They showed up, and the government didn't, quote unquote, do anything essentially to protect her.
Mm-hmm.
So what I don't know all of the backdrop to that story, but I wonder if this was a woman who was by any way advocating for Black lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they wanted to shut her down.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have to guess that she was in some kind of way, because why else would she be a target?
Right. Absolutely. It's just disgusting. Go ahead.
So, when I look at this behavior and I see white folks around me, whether it's on TV or social media or in person, who are shocked by this, the first thing that I think is that you are dangerous to me.
Mm-hmm.
If you are shocked by this, if you don't understand this, if you are, if this is unbelievable to you, that tells me that you are not on your anti-racist journey, that you're not doing your work, that you are unplugged from reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore you are dangerous. So my first inclination is to take a step back from them, because they've shown me everything that I need to know. But the other thing that I'd like to say about that is they don't know because they don't want to know.
Mm-hmm.
They get the opportunity due to, you know, white entitlement to plug into reality if they want to or not. They get the opportunity to know what's happening as it relates to the plight of Black people, brown people in this country, if they choose. It's kind of like the elective in high school. They don't have to take this course. They don't have to understand what's happening to us. That's the option. They get to opt out. And so that is also part of the reason why this violence keeps happening to us, is because white folks get to opt in and out as they choose. And so they are responsible in that opt out. They are responsible and complicit in that silence and that ignorance.
Well, and it's really powerful that you mentioned silence, because Dr. King talked about that in his letter from a Birmingham jail. He talked about the silence of the white majority and the role of white moderates in helping to perpetuate racial injustice, because they're telling us, just hold on, sit down. The passage of time will cure all the racial injustices that you're experiencing. And Dr. King said, no, you're part of the problem. I'm not worried about the Ku Klux Klanners and the white citizens counselors. I'm worried about you. And so that's part of the message that we have to help well-meaning, and in well-meaning, we're being gracious when we say that, right? Well-meaning, well-intentioned white folks to understand that you are just as much as responsible for what is happening as those clowns that went and stormed the Capitol. Because how many white people were silent during the nearly 400 years of enslavement of Black people, and who benefited from that system, right? Not having Black people to compete with in the labor force because our people are in chains, right? Benefiting when cotton is produced down south and they can wear whatever kind of, you know, cotton attire and shirts and whatever for their family, knowing that Black bodies are paying the cost for that. And then how many well-meaning white people drank out of whites-only water fountains and used white-only bathrooms and sent their kids to white-only schools? And how many still live in white-only neighborhoods and white-only religious institutions? That's a perpetuation of these things that you are talking about. But society has conditioned white people to be blind to the ways in which they participate daily in the system without disrupting it. And some of those white people will join us at times at protests, but then when there's no news coverage, when things slow down, they're back to business as usual with the BLM sign in their yards to boot.
And not only on their side, in their yards, they may be, you know, they may have the audacity to wear a T-shirt, and some even have the audacity, which ticks me off ultimately, to throw up a fist. Really? Really? Oh, don't you know, you know you about to bark up my tree right about now. You talking about those?
You need to unpack the racial implications, Catrice. So do your thing.
Man, listen, if we looked at those folks who stormed the Capitol, they were predominantly white men. Who the heck do you think most of those men went home to?
White women.
White women, white wives, white fiancés, white girlfriends who are complicit in the crimes that are committed against Black bodies. The white women who welcomed those men home or who were there with them while they were acting like thugs are co-conspirators to that crime, to those federal crimes, to essentially, you know, that anti-Black violence that we saw, because at the end of the day, that's what it's really all about. And one of the things that I talk about when I'm teaching white women or engaging with them is that they are the neck of the beast. They are the neck of the beast that haunts us, and the beast that haunts us is the beast of white terrorism. And you know what they say: the head can't move without the neck, Nakima.
Absolutely.
These are the white women. These are the white women who've been the 53 and I think the 52% that voted for Trump. They're the ones that are silent, sitting at home and being complicit. They're the ones that try to stand alongside us and say, hey, Catrice, I'm one of the good ones. They're the Amy Klobuchars. They're the Hillary Clintons. They're the Elizabeth Warrens. Those folks don't get passes. And so white women, as far as I'm concerned, are an even bigger problem. Because they are the ones who feed the beast. They're the ones that keep it alive. They are the neck, and that beast can't move without the neck. And that's exactly why I go straight for the jugular in dealing with white women. Because if we possibly can get white women to get on board and to do this work and to work on their anti-Blackness and to get on this, effective anti-racism plan, journey, process, whatever you want to call it, then just maybe they will go into their homes and deal with their violent white husbands or partners or fiancés. And maybe they will then begin to raise their children to be anti-racist and to work on their own anti-Blackness. To me, I see that being one way to kill the beast.
Now, you've written a number of books on this subject. You are the premier expert in deconstructing white women violence and educating on it and training people about it. For those who maybe have never heard of white women violence, can you give a brief synopsis of what it actually is?
Absolutely. I think when people hear white woman violence, the first thing that comes to mind is they think of very overt, very blatant, explicit acts of violence, and oftentimes it is. We saw that in a situation with what's her name, Berlinda Nebo, who was a 25-year-old Black woman who was walking walking down the street from an event with a non-Black friend and came upon a group of MAGA supporters having some kind of event or protest. And she thought, oh, shoot, we need to go a different way, or we need to leave or get away. But before she could do that, 20, 30, 40 white folks in their Trump gear surrounded her and essentially attacked her. They pulled her extensions out of her hair. There's an image floating around on social media where there's one man who was holding her while another person pepper sprayed her. And she was basically attacked by a mob. And so if you look closely in that image, you can see that there is a white woman doing these things. You can see white women in the crowd. And so when we think about white woman violence, those kind of things come to mind. But white woman violence is also the white women who get angry and write letters. The white women who smile in your face and talk about you to your supervisor and get you written up and fired. White woman violence is calling security. White woman violence is all the Beckys and all the Karens that we've seen over the internet. Barbecue Becky, Permit Patty, the white woman who called the police on a Black woman because she was taking a nap in her dorm room. Amy Cooper. All of those kinds of acts are acts of violence, and they're acts of violence because they emotionally, physically, spiritually, and literally cause harm to Black bodies. And so, there's no limit to white woman violence. They are enacting this violence in every space, every place, all over the country. And it's taken a toll on Black bodies. It's taken a toll on our emotional self, our psychological and spiritual self.
Well, I noticed that when things were unfolding at the Capitol, in the comments on Facebook, people were saying, all the women who are staying at home. And I said, there are women out there at the Capitol right now, acting like barbarians, right alongside these men. And it was interesting to me, like you said, about people being willing to harm themselves, that out of all the people shot, that it was a woman who was sacrificed in that situation. This woman had been in the military and everything. So she essentially gave up her life to participate in white terrorism.
Yep.
as a woman. Like there's, you know how we have the stereotypes that women don't do these things, and when your mind is so focused on being anti-Black, perpetuating white supremacy and white terrorism, all of those stereotypes go out the window.
That's
And
right.
we're not safe, just like the Black woman who you just showed in Los Angeles, where a white woman literally pulled out her extensions, like you said. I don't know what she had, wig or whatever, but by the end of the day, all her hair was off of her head. And it was a white woman in her face being a part of the brutalization of this Black woman. And then all these people standing by watching. It reminded me of some of the scenes from actual lynchings, where there are mostly white men, but there's also white women and white children in those crowds of people who are lynching and maiming Black bodies. Unfortunately, white women violence is as American as apple pie.
That's right. And let's look at this. Let's talk about the fact that white men were willing to allow a white woman to be sacrificed in the name of white terrorism and anti-Blackness. And the thing that I teach white women who deal with me, work with me in whatever capacity, white men don't care about white women either.
Mm-hmm.
They want them to be submissive. They want them to, stay barefoot and pregnant. Collectively, I mean, let's just keep it real. We can look at it and see. We can look at the history. We can look at what's happening now. White women are still fighting for their rights.
Mm-hmm.
Still fighting for, to have equity and equality. White men are not going to give white women equity and equality either. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't it make sense for white women to be in alignment with, to lock arms with, to partner with Black and brown people to take down white male terrorism, white male supremacy? Mm-hmm. No. Yeah, it makes logical sense to us, but they know. White women know that they are number two. They know that they are settling for crumbs. They know that they are chasing fool's gold. They're never going to get that equity. They're never going to get that equality. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to get it because they're stepping on the backs of Black and brown men to be submissive to white men who don't give a damn about them either. Mm-hmm. It's all a sick, twisted, it's a sick, twisted pot of toxicity and sickness. Mm-hmm. And, when you think about it, it's the words that I keep saying, Nekima, are sociopathic and psychopathic. And I mean that with every fiber of my being. The collective white body is sick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that back
They're
in the
sick.
day.
And so to people.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, for us that are living in reality, because the collective white body's living in a delusion, that reality that they live in is not real. And so, for those of us who are living in reality, we can look at that and see how toxic and sick and irrational that it really is. And they can't see it because it's like a fish swimming in water. It's what they live and breathe every day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So for those who want to break free to the extent possible from this box that they've been placed in, that they live in, that they've allowed themselves to remain in, what would you suggest for moving forward?
So one of the things that I teach, I use this analogy of the fishbowl of white terrorism. And if you can imagine a small little goldfish fishbowl, just, for purposes of understanding that, and it's filled with water. There's three elements in that water. Number one, there's white terrorism in that water. There's anti-Blackness in that water. And there's anesthesia in the water. Mm-hmm. The reason that white folks have collectively over the years been able to be silent and complacent and complicit and take no action to stop the harm and violence against Black and brown bodies in this country is because they've been anesthetized. They have been swimming in this water of anesthesia. They are apathetic. They don't feel anything for Black bodies. They don't feel sympathy. They don't feel empathy. They don't feel compassion, which is why they continue to treat us as objects. Mm-hmm. And so if this is true, and it is, And if you're a white person listening in or watching the replay of this, you're swimming in that water. And the only way that you begin to be a better human being and find your humanity is you got to get out of the water, because nobody lives in the water but white folks.
Mm-hmm.
We are all outside of the fishbowl, Nikema. This is where humanity is.
Mm-hmm.
Humanity's outside the fishbowl. Those people inside of there, I don't know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
But according to history, there's never been a time as of today, that there's never been a time in this history when white bodies have not been violent towards Black bodies, ever.
Mm-hmm.
And that is some sociopathic, psychopathic behavior and legacy. And so for people who don't want to be a part of that anymore, you got to get out of the water so that you can wake up from the anesthesia, from the indoctrination, from the conditioning of white terrorism. And the last thing I'm going to say about that is when you jump out of the fishbowl, you're not going to be a fish anymore, which means you're going to gasp for air. It's going to be hard. You're going to flop around. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to think you're going to die, because this anti-racism work is hard, because you now have to look at the ugly truth about the things that you've done to Black and brown people in your life and what you've been complicit to. And so they literally have to spiritually die and become a whole different human being. And a lot of people don't want to do the work, Nikema, because it is literally that hard for them.
Well, it's like going through a rebirth, right? When you get out of the water.
Yeah. And if you were to talk to any of the white women who have taken my classes, and especially the white women who are in my collective, they will say, Catrice, I feel more human by working with you than I ever have in my life. I was not connected to my humanity. I was a zombie just moving through the world, indoctrinated with violence and hate and anti-Blackness. And for the first time in my life, I feel like a human being. I can have empathy and sympathy and compassion for Black people. Because really, Nikema, the thing that keeps white people from taking action so that we don't have to experience this violence is that they lack empathy. And if anybody here is into the psychology world, or that you're a therapist or a psychologist, such as myself, one of the traits of a sociopath is lack of empathy. So on a psychological level, we're dealing with some sociopaths here.
And it runs so deep. I mean, that's the terrifying part of it. Like, one generation after the next is continuing to repeat the mistakes of the past and acting as if it's normal. And for us, it's not normal, because we're constantly having to look over our shoulders and feeling unsafe, whether it's out in the streets protesting or going into the workplace, because we know at some point we are going to face harm from white bodies who are not conscious. And like you said, not in touch with their own humanity. And it's absolutely despicable. One of the things that was interesting to me as all of this was unfolding was that you posted a lot of really powerful things. You posted about a Black woman, Miriam Carey, I believe is her name.
Yes.
Who was shot and killed outside of the Capitol, I believe by Capitol Police. And most people don't know her name. Most people didn't give it a second thought. It sent a message, don't come near the Capitol because you're going to be shot dead, like that Black woman. But we know that that's not the case. Why? Because we're dealing with the racial double standard at every hand. And it results in the death of Black bodies. And like you said, that collective amnesia within the white community.
Yeah. From what I understand about the story of Miriam Carey, it was October 3rd, 2013. She was shot to death while driving her car while her young daughter was in the car. I think she was having a mental health issue, and tried to turn around and make a U-turn of some sort and hit the barricade, the bike barricade, and was immediately, they didn't say, ma'am, are you okay? Ma'am, do you need help? Ma'am, can we help you in any kind of way? Or, you know what, you should probably get away from here. You don't want to, you don't want to have any problems with the Capitol Police. It was instantly shot into her car, 26 shots, Nikema, and they hit her 5 times with her daughter in the car. So the Capitol Police know how to protect the Capitol. They know how to keep people from invading and seizing the Capitol.
And that's what I was trying to tell people who are saying, this shows how vulnerable our Capitol is if BLM. And I'm like, please, the Capitol is not vulnerable. They would have literally had the full brigade out ready for us, military tanks, who knows what, if they thought that we were going to go from a protest to actually storming the Capitol. And there would have been Black bodies piled up all outside the Capitol.
A massacre.
A massacre. And guess what? The collective white body would have said that this is a justified use of deadly force. That's what happens time and time again when Black bodies are killed by police. For some reason, people can finally see, because Derek Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes, some say over 9 minutes, and they saw that video and they're like, oh, I can't believe it's this bad. Oh my goodness, the police, blah, blah, blah. And then fast forward to the next incident that just happened of a Black man being killed by Minneapolis police, where their story sounds really far-fetched, and we're asking for video proof. Just show us that this happened the way you did. Show us you had no other ways to de-escalate. Show us that this wasn't an ambush. Show us that your policies and practices and protocols have changed. And guess what? White people have dropped off the radar when it comes to actually demanding real answers and not just more okie doke. I'm like, well, what happened when George Floyd was killed? Y'all were all out there because you watched a Black body be slain on video, and this Black man was killed, and we don't have answers, and you're sitting back at home somewhere, watching the news. So even at the most recent protests we've had, normally, as you know from being here and being a part of these protests, 70% of the people or more at times are white. Now with this most recent incident where there's some questions circling around, whether Dalal Eid had guns and all this other stuff, 90% have been Black, from the Somali community, African-American community, other people of color, but white people have been nowhere to be found as far as trying to actually demand answers that could help shift these systems. And that's what we face time and time again, these cycles. And it's like, the police aren't trustworthy. We've demonstrated that. There were many bodies slain before George Floyd. Where were you then? And where are you now in terms of understanding that these acts of terrorism are not an anomaly, but they are a part of the system of white supremacy and white terrorism that's been allowed to persist?
Absolutely. I was, like you said, I was there for a lot of the George Floyd protests and occupations. And, my phone was blowing up like crazy. I got home to, hundreds of people signing up for stuff, buying books. I sold more books in the month that George Floyd was murdered and assassinated than I had all year in the previous year. People, oh gosh, white folks, we got to do something. We got to do something. We got to do something. Let me read a book. Really? That's what you're going to do? A man has been murdered live on camera, and you're going to read a book? That is the mediocre, bare minimum, pathetic, pitiful minimum that white people could have done at that time, is read a book. Nikema, I get so fired up about it, and what's happening is when we see them come and go, what they're doing is they're going back into the fishbowl. Being out here and being human and feeling the pain and the grief and the anger, and then having to call out, parents and family and loved ones being called out by Black people and being held accountable for their violence. They can't take it. It's too hard. So I'm going to go back in here and be anesthetized and be coddled and soothed in this sick, toxic fishbowl of white terrorism. So when we see white people go away and disappear, that's what they've done. They went back into that shit. They went back into that toxicity because that feels better for them. And when we talk about white violence, one of the things that I teach about are the weapons of whiteness. And the number one weapon of whiteness is white centering. White people will center whiteness. They will center white people. They will center white feelings. They will make it all about them, their comfort, their needs, their wants, their desires. And damn you, Black people. If I feel like being uncomfortable, I'll read a book. If I feel like being uncomfortable, I may show up at a rally. I may write a letter to the governor if I feel like it. And so that pattern that you're seeing with white folks coming and going, it's not anything new. They've been doing it for centuries, but it is them going back into white comfort, white silence, white complacency, and ultimately white terrorism. Because when they're swimming in that water, they continue to swim in the indoctrination of violence. So they're not getting better. They're not getting well. They're not becoming better people. They're getting sicker and sicker and sicker every time they go back into that water.
And when they go back, it's deadly for us.
It is absolutely deadly for us. And that's why when white folks show me who they are and where they are or are not on their journeys of anti-racism, if I don't see and feel the energy of someone who's doing the work, that's a red flag for me to get away, to step back, to not deal with them, cut them off, because they're dangerous, literally dangerous.
Absolutely. So I want to cover a couple things before our time here ends. We have a demonstration that's coming up on Saturday at noon. We were supposed to have one the same night as all of this unfolded at the Capitol, but we took safety precautions because we know these people are willing to go as far as they can, right, to harm us. But we have postponed that until Saturday. So Saturday at noon, there are two protests combined into one, focused on Jacob Blake, Kenosha, Wisconsin, Black man shot in the back 7 times by an officer. Prosecutor decided this week to not charge the officer who paralyzed this man in front of his kids. And then the other aspect of the protest is focused on Dalal Eid, a young Somali man who was killed by Minneapolis police in what they're calling a gun sting, with, again, very scant information released to the public. So we're demanding more transparency and accountability. And of course, we're going to bring up what happened at the Capitol and this racial double standard, this white terrorism, how the government basically rolled out the welcome mat. So we're inviting people to come out noon Saturday at the government center to be a part of that demonstration, to do more than read a book. They should be buying your books on Amazon.com. We did, I believe, post the link, or we will after the show. So they should be buying your books, but your books, the way that you unpack everything, should lead people to action, to go to the front lines, to give reparations, to get out of the fishbowl. And you have a reparations series that's coming up that they can find on your Facebook page to participate. You'll have a number of people who are on the front lines, who are experts in their fields, talking about reparations and the imperative to put your resources where your mouth is in terms of your racial justice journey. I also want to encourage people to support you through PayPal. You do so much labor, and it is very heavy lifting. It's hard work. It's taxing. All of your intellectual property that goes into this. I want people to go to your PayPal at paypal.me/Catriceology, CATRICEOLOGY, and support Catrice's work. Catrice deserves our support. You all have heard the Black brilliance that has come forward today by this amazing Black woman who day in and day out gives her all for the good of our people and to help us become free. So we need to support you, Catrice. And I just personally thank you for the time, the energy, the brilliance that you have shared during this podcast. And I want to give you the final word as we close out. I also want to thank Josh, our producer, for helping us out today.
Thank you so much for that, Nakima. It's always a pleasure to share space with you and to be in community with you as we do this work for freedom, justice, and liberation, specifically for Black people, Black and brown people in this country. It is taxing work. It takes a lot of energy, and both you and I had to go on sabbaticals last year because we were just emotionally wiped out from pouring out, from putting our boots on the physical ground and those internet streets. And so I do encourage people to go, white people specifically. If you're a white woman, you can start with getting antagonist advocates and allies on Amazon. The next appropriate book would be to read White Spaces, Missing Faces. For Black and brown folks listening in, I wrote a book specifically for you on how to identify and deal with white woman violence. It's called The Becky Code. In that book, I explicitly lay out some of those weapons of whiteness, how they cause harm and what you can do about that by using your weapons of winning. And most recently wrote a book specifically for Black folks, men and women, all Black people, called Weapons of Whiteness. There are 45, I believe, weapons of whiteness detailed in that book so that you can understand what is happening to you. You can identify this violence that's coming at you left and right in every space and every place. So you can check those out on Amazon. And lastly, what I would like to say specifically for white women tuning in, all of my workshops will be in the Twin Cities in 2021. That means I will be there once a month at least, from March through October. If you're serious about this work, if you're serious about laying down your weapons of whiteness and becoming an accomplice for Black lives, you need to show up at this workshop. You can find all that at catriceology.com and the workshop schedules on shetalkswetalk.com. So Nakima, thank you for having me. I'm excited that I get to see you at least once a month, every month almost this year in the Twin Cities. And, thank you for putting out that clarion call, as you call it. It's been my pleasure and honor to answer that and to be of service to the people in the Twin Cities.
Thank you so much, Catrice. We love and appreciate you and everything you poured out, and we will carry forward. Thank you to everyone who tuned in to this broadcast. Please share this information with those in your network, and please watch it again if you need to so that you can internalize some of the things that we talked about here that I believe will aid in your journey towards racial justice. So thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day.